Hey everyone, tonight we're starting somewhere uncomfortable, right there at the airport gate, where the scent of jet fuel and burnt espresso meets betrayal. The gate agent looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your name isn't on the manifest." Through the glass, I saw them, Heather and Brad, boarding, smiling, laughing. They waved like I was luggage they'd already checked. I stood there, stunned, passport in hand. Nails painted a soft coral that Heather once complimented the blouse with little embroidered hibiscus flowers, the one I wore because I thought it mattered. I'd triple-checked the group text that said, "Don't worry about anything, Mom. Just show up." So I did. Early as usual. Gate 37 gleamed with morning fluorescence. The air buzzed with lemon-scented floor polish, over-steamed lattes, and the hum of travelers in motion. Except me. I was the static. When the agent repeated it, "You're not on this reservation," it landed like a verdict. I turned toward my children. Children I raised, bathed, loved through braces and breakups, and Heather said with that over-smiled face of hers, "Oh, right. There weren't enough seats on this flight. We figured you'd just catch the next one. Not, 'We're so sorry.' Not, 'Mom, we messed up.' Just that breezy Heather laugh, like I was a misplaced charger." Brad nodded, offered a shrug. "You'll be fine," he said like I was a seat filler on a game show. That's the moment, the split second, when disappointment slips into decision. They boarded. I watched them disappear down the jet bridge, my throat tight but my spine straight. When the gate agent said the next flight had one seat left in first class, I didn't ask for the price. I handed over my credit card. "The one with my name. Just mine. Window seat, please." So before you feel the sting of being written off by the people who should know better, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soft noise, and let's get started tonight. At 30,000 feet, I had champagne in my hand and no family itinerary tugging at my wrist. The bubbles tasted less like celebration and more like clarity. I opened my phone and typed a new folder name, Exit Strategy. Old age wisdom says if they forget to pack your presents, unpack your purpose. It's not exactly embroidered on throw pillows, but it should be. 3 hours earlier, they waved me off like a temporary inconvenience. But from 2A first class was quiet crisp. The man next to me ordered a gin and tonic and didn't ask me what my grandkids were up to. Bless him. It was somewhere over the Pacific, above the clouds, and past my patience, that I began rewriting my will. Not just the paper one, though we'd get to that, but the spiritual one. The emotional inheritance. The boundaries I'd stopped believing I had the right to enforce. A quirky fact for you flamingos can only eat with their heads upside down. I know. Irrelevant. But it came to mind because suddenly I realized that for most of my life, I'd been swallowing things wrong just to fit someone else's shape. My children planned the vacation. They booked the villa. 5 people, not 6. They made room for their partners, their children, their sunscreen bottles, but not me, the woman who taught them to swim. I wasn't grieving their oversight anymore. I was naming it. I'd been useful, convenient, a filler of gaps, a permanent +1 without the plus. But now I was flying solo. And for the first time in a very long time, I liked the view. By the time the wheels touched Maui's sun-warmed tarmac, I already knew I wouldn't be staying at the villa. Not because I wasn't welcome, well, okay, maybe that too, but because I wasn't needed. And you know what old people say, you can tell who values you by who prepares for your arrival. There was no 6th keycard waiting. No extra towel draped across a sun lounger. No text that said, "Let us know when you land." Nothing. But I'd made my own arrangements. The boutique hotel I found on the flight was perched just off a quiet bluff, with views of the ocean instead of a parking lot. It smelled like salt air and hibiscus, not chlorine and sunscreen. The concierge smiled like I was someone they expected, and my room had a handwritten card on the pillow. Just my name, no grandma, scribbled as an afterthought. I stood on the balcony watching the waves roll in, and I felt something that hadn't visited me in years' space. Real space. Not the kind you make by shrinking. You ever notice how we women of a certain age are trained to take up less room? Physically, emotionally, even in conversation, I used to apologize for breathing too loud. Now I exhaled like I meant it. I drove myself from the airport in a rented red convertible top, down hair whipping in a way my grandsons would call chaotic. I called it liberated. I'd asked the rental clerk for the smallest, most impractical vehicle they had. His eyes lit up like I'd handed him a plot twist. 10 minutes later, I was zipping past palm trees and ocean spray, my suitcase tucked in the back, like a passenger that didn't argue. That night, I didn't dine with family. I ate at a little place the front desk recommended grilled fish, cold white wine, and no high chairs in sight. I watched couples hold hands and servers hustle. And I realized something slightly devastating. I wasn't lonely. I was comfortable. Old age wisdom moment. Just because you've always been part of a group doesn't mean you've always belonged to it. In academia, we might call this a redefinition of proximity-based identity. Or, figuring out who you are when no one's asking you to watch their kids. Quirky fact of the evening. Sea cucumbers breathe through their butts. I read that on a cocktail napkin and laughed so hard, I nearly choked on my lemon sorbet. No one told me to lower my voice. The next morning, the sun rose like it had been rehearsing for me. I put on a white linen blouse, my best sunglasses, and walked to the resort where they were staying. Not to be let in, just to look. From behind a row of palm trees, I saw Heather sprawled across a lounge chair with a glossy magazine, Brad dunking the boys in the pool, everyone glistening under an umbrella of curated joy. There was no empty chair, no space for me, literally or otherwise. And when Heather finally spotted me, her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost in linen. "Oh, you made it," she called. I smiled, walked up, took stock. Her husband scrolling. My grandsons not even waving. No towel set out for me. No drink. No room. "I'm staying nearby," I said. Heather blinked. "Oh, you didn't check in here." I shrugged. Didn't seem like there was space. There was a pause. That sharp, tight-lipped kind that fills in the gap between guilt and performance. "Well, come sit." I glanced around. Not a single open chair. So I said breezily, "I'll see you at dinner," and turned before they could insist otherwise. Dinner came, and I arrived before them, not at their table, at one nearby. Corner seat, full ocean view. Ordered wine, appetizer, entree, dessert. Ate slow, like each bite deserved applause. When they walked in, Heather saw me mid-bite. She smiled. I lifted my glass. Not to toast. To acknowledge. When I returned to my hotel, I kicked off my gold sandals and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked at the end of the clause that used to leave room for them. I started reviewing everything beneficiaries' emergency contacts, co-signed cards. Legacy, I decided, required presence, not just bloodlines. Funny thing about silence, when it stops being an obligation, it becomes power. I didn't expect them to call that night, and they didn't. No text, asking if I'd made it back safely. No, "Did you enjoy your dinner, Mom?" Not even a passive hope to see you tomorrow. You know what they say, some silences are just noise in a nicer dress. The next morning, I woke early. The breeze off the ocean was still soft, not yet salted with sunscreen and resort speakers. I made myself coffee in the little ceramic mug the hotel had placed by the minibar, then walked barefoot out onto the patio. My linen pants whispered against my calves as I moved, the kind of whisper I used to mistake for guilt. I slipped on a pair of gold sandals and dressed slowly white blouse, soft periwinkle, the one with the subtle embroidered trim. Not for them, for me. Then I drove back to their resort. This time they'd asked me to join them for brunch. Well asked is generous. More like informed me in a tone just polite enough to leave no room for graceful refusal. The buffet was vast. Bacon steam rising like morning incense. Children weaving between tables like syrup-slick ghosts. Heather spotted me as I approached the line and waved me over with a coffee cup. As I joined the queue behind her, I overheard her talking to another couple tourists, clearly judging by the lobster-red sunburns and enthusiasm for papaya. "That's my mom," she said brightly. "She likes doing her own thing." I turned slightly, just enough to meet their gaze and smile. "I used to," I said, voice calm. "Now I'm learning how." They laughed like it was a joke. Heather didn't. I took a mimosa, skipped the eggs, and made my way to a table at the edge of the patio. No one asked if I wanted to sit with them. No one offered to move a chair. So I sat where the light was soft and the view wide. Over French toast and quiet sips, I began a list in my phone. Title times. I was excluded, but smiled anyway. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even revenge. It was record keeping. Academic phrase for you, memory curation, as a form of boundary reconstruction. Or more casually, I started remembering the things I'd been told to forget. First entry, Heather's wedding seating chart. I'd been placed at the back table with her college roommates' parents. The bartender even asked if I was with the caterers. Second, Brad's first promotion dinner. I'd covered his rent that month. Wasn't even invited. Third, the boys' school recital texted 30 minutes before curtain. I was already in my robe. Fourth, the baby shower. I brought the food cleaned up and wasn't listed as a host. Fifth, last Thanksgiving. We figured you'd be with Gloria. By the time I finished my mimosa, I was up to 13 entries. Old age wisdom for the day. Just because they call it tradition doesn't mean it's sacred. Sometimes it's just repeated disrespect. I walked the beach afterward. Not the one by their resort. Mine. A hidden stretch past a garden gate near my hotel. The sand was cool where the shadows held it warm where the sun reached. My toes sank in rhythm with the tide. You know flamingos. Not only do they eat upside down, they also stand on one leg, not to look elegant, but because it conserves energy. Balance isn't always about grace. Sometimes it's just about survival. I thought about every time I held Heather's babies so she could sleep. The time I wrote a check to clear Brad's student loan, called it a graduation gift so he wouldn't feel ashamed. The weekends spent babysitting so they could reconnect. The long drives home from their houses, the dishes left in the sink, the silence. Back then, I'd thought I was being generous. Now I realized I was being erased. So I opened that same note on my phone, the one I'd started at 30,000 feet. Folder name, exit strategy. New subfolder, financial edits. First entry, call estate attorney. Second, trust revisions. Third, remove cosigners. Fourth, protect the house. I walked back up the sand path without hurrying, every step lighter than the one before. Like the tide had taken a little weight with it. By dinner the list was longer, but my appetite sharper. I made a reservation for myself at the hotel's rooftop restaurant. Window view. Candle lit. Ordered exactly what I wanted: roasted eggplant garlic shrimp and a rosé that didn't apologize for being pink. As I looked out at the sunset, I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about Florence. The next morning, I made 2 calls before breakfast. The first was to my estate attorney. The second was to my banker. "Hi, yes," I said in that tone women aren't supposed to use unless they're making a dentist appointment or asking for the manager. "I'd like to update some authorizations. Today." Neither of them questioned me. They both knew the type of call it was. The kind made quietly after long years of loud tolerance. One they'd heard before from women who signed over their power in their 40s and started reclaiming it in their 60s. After hanging up, I ordered poached eggs and fresh fruit to my room and sat at the little bistro table overlooking the water. The hibiscus near the balcony had started to bloom again. Bright, stubborn, unapologetic. I added another note to my phone. Title things I was told to forget. It was getting long. Brad's text from last year. Hey, can you help cover the boys' summer camp again? We'll totally pay you back this time. Heather's voice on voicemail. Sorry, we forgot to loop you into Christmas planning. We thought you'd want something low-key. That last one came with a digital holiday card I hadn't even been included in. Old age wisdom today. You don't owe people the version of yourself they prefer if it costs you your dignity. I checked my email. There it was, a document from my estate lawyer. Subject line revision draft. Family trust. The file opened with a satisfying click. Heather Vaughan and Bradley Keating, previously named as co-trustees, had been formally removed. I'd asked Renee, my lawyer, to include a new clause, clear, bold, and legally ironclad. Any party who attempts to contest the estate or my mental capacity will forfeit all inheritance and fiduciary roles immediately and irrevocably. Quirky fact of the day. Octopuses have 3 hearts. One stops beating when they swim. That's biology's way of saying sometimes, in order to move forward, you have to stop giving life to things that only worked when you stayed still. I leaned back and exhaled deeply, deliberately. There's something oddly thrilling about watching the scaffolding of a life shift. Like repainting a house you've lived in so long it started to disappear into the neighborhood. Later, I went for a walk through a row of shops near the marina. I bought a leather journal, handmade. Cream pages, no lines. It felt like a promise. Then I stopped into a little cafe, ordered a cappuccino, and wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. Legacy requires presence, not performance. I remembered an academic phrase from years ago, something I'd read in a dusty seminar on intergenerational wealth entitlement, is often confused with proximity, but they are not synonymous. Brad and Heather had proximity. Ava, Brad's daughter, had something else. I hadn't seen her in years, since she was barely a teenager, but I remembered the way she used to linger after family dinners, asking questions no one else thought to ask. She listened. That night, I walked the beach again, this time in silence. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that heals. I thought about the year Michael died. How Heather had said, "It's okay, Mom. You'll be fine. You're so strong." As if grief were a muscle. As if solitude were a skill. She hadn't offered to stay, just sent flowers and a photo book with blank pages. I'd spent the better part of 5 years being so strong, I'd forgotten what softness even felt like. But strength and softness aren't mutually exclusive. That night, back in my room, I lit a candle and placed it beside the leather journal. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine, and stood on the balcony, watching the last of the light sink behind the palms. Tomorrow I would make the final updates. The trust, the accounts, the new designations. Tonight I would rest, alone but not abandoned. They spotted me before I saw them. Heather with that tight hostess at an open house smile, Brad already halfway through his first cocktail. The table they'd reserved for dinner was too small for 6, but just big enough for the 5 of them to stretch their elbows. I arrived early, of course, but sat elsewhere. Corner of the patio, ocean behind me, candlelight in front of me, and a chilled glass of Sauvignon Blanc held loosely between 2 fingers that no longer clenched. They noticed me about halfway through their appetizers. Heather waved mid-bite like I was a friendly ghost haunting the buffet. I lifted my wineglass slightly, not in greeting, not quite a toast, but acknowledgement. Like you might raise a hand to someone you once loved, who now walks by you on a city street without slowing down. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't seethe. I didn't text Lily, my goddaughter, the one person who'd probably understand it all. I just ordered exactly what I wanted: seared scallops, lemon risotto, a soft slice of coconut cake with mango compote. The server smiled when he brought the check and said, "I hope someone is treating you tonight." "They are," I said. Me. Old age wisdom. You teach people how to treat you even when you don't mean to. Especially when you don't. Back in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and reviewed the updated trust one more time, not because I doubted it, because I wanted to feel it, line by line. A clause for caregivers, a clause for Lily, a clause for Ava, should she one day show up without an agenda, without Heather or Brad, simply because she wanted to know the truth, not a version, not the spin, just me. That night, I made a second list. The first was times I was excluded, but smiled anyway. This one was called Assumptions They Made About Me. Entry 1, that I wouldn't notice. 2, that I wouldn't leave. 3, that love meant obedience. 4, that inheritance was automatic. And the 5th, that I had nowhere else to be. That assumption made me laugh out loud, sharp and sudden, into the quiet of the room. I laughed so hard I startled myself. Then I closed the laptop and poured a small whiskey from the minibar. Quirky fact for the day. In Japan, there's a concept called tsundoku, the practice of buying books and letting them pile up unread. It's not hoarding. It's aspirational. A belief in future possibilities. I realized that was me. A woman they thought had stopped evolving, but who had entire chapters she hadn't even opened yet. I sat on the bed, sipping slowly, watching the fan spin. A list formed in my head, and I opened my notes app once more. Title: appointments to schedule. Estate planning attorney, final signatures. Banker, separate accounts. Financial planner, trust structuring. Notary, before departure. Therapist, optional, but maybe. Dance class registration, definitely. Because here's the thing, planning for your future isn't petty. It's preparation. And withholding an inheritance isn't punishment, it's protection. I turned the lamp off and lay back, the dark, no longer heavy, more like velvet. And as I drifted off, I smiled at one last ironic academic phrase that popped into my head. Post-maternal autonomy in late-stage identity reclamation, also known as being done. When I got home, the dust hadn't even had time to settle before the requests started rolling in. I hadn't taken off my shoes yet. My suitcase wheels still tracked airport grit across the hallway rug. The orchids in the window bloomed in quiet defiance of abandonment. And then buzz, buzz, buzz. Heather. Hey Mom, just checking. Can you babysit Tuesday night? We're going to be jet-lagged and wrecked. Thanks. No greeting. No glad you're home safe. Just the usual assumption that I'd always be here waiting in my neutral-toned living room like a subscription service no one remembers they stopped paying for. I stared at the screen thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed carefully, I'm unavailable, but you'll figure it out. Muted the thread. Old age wisdom. People don't respect boundaries you never built. Later that evening, Heather called, straight to voicemail. Her message dripped with the artificial sweetness of someone trying to sound polite while still holding a grudge. Hi, Mom. Got your text. I guess that's your right. I just wish you'd, communicate more clearly instead of being passive-aggressive. Anyway, call me. Brad followed it up an hour later with a meme. A cartoon grandma in aviator sunglasses, leather pants, holding a margarita. Text overlay. When you hit 70 and stop giving a damn. No caption, just vibes. I didn't reply. I printed it, slid it into a new manila folder labeled Perception versus Presence. Because this wasn't about pettiness. This was about documentation. Quirky fact. Male seahorses give birth. Because even in nature, sometimes the unexpected one does the heavy lifting. I sat down at my desk, opened my trust document, reviewed the changes one more time, added a notation at the bottom of the family inheritance clause. Legacy requires presence, not performance. I used to think being low maintenance was a compliment. That being chill meant I was gracious. Turns out, it just meant I demanded nothing and got exactly that in return. I logged into my bank accounts next, revoked shared access, removed Heather from the utilities she'd insisted were easier if just on autopay, cancelled the co-signed card Brad used to help manage expenses but rarely paid in full. By the end of the day, everything bore one name, Mine. There's a strange comfort in reclaiming your own identity through administrative housekeeping. It's like sweeping out corners you didn't realize were still full of other people's shoes. Next up, the dance class. I found the flyer in a cafe window, solo steps movement for women over 60, held at the community center on Thursday evenings. No partners, no pressure, just music and space. I signed up. That Thursday, I stood in front of a wall of mirrors, barefoot, surrounded by 6 other women with soft shoulders and stories in their hips. The instructor had grey braids and silver bangles that jingled when she clapped. "We don't care what you look like," she said. "We care that you show up." So I did. I moved, not gracefully, not flawlessly, but fully. For 60 minutes, there was no trust document, no Brad, no Heather, no recitals missed, no texts unanswered. Just Sam Cooke on the speakers and the kind of electricity that fills in your bones when you stop asking who you are and start deciding. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. Subject, joint account revisions. Body. I'd like to review all shared financial arrangements. My goal is to go solo across the board. Sent. I requested a fresh checkbook, updated the contact info on my utilities, changed the titles on 2 investment accounts, called the cable company, and sat on hold for 20 minutes to confirm that yes, only my name should be on file. They asked if I'd like to add another authorized user. "No," I said, smiling into the phone. "No one else needs to be on this ride." And just like that, I became a one-woman estate, self-funded, self-governed, self-approved. Funny thing, I didn't feel lonely. I felt electric. It was raining softly the morning my lawyer emailed me. Subject line, beneficiary designation deadline, 1 week left. I stared at the message for a long time, the way you might stare at a question you've already answered in your gut, but still feel the need to triple-check the math. 7 days to decide who would inherit everything I'd worked for. The house, the accounts, the little brokerage fund that Michael and I started with our wedding gift money and never touched until our granddaughter was born. Heather and Brad had been removed. That was already done. Not in anger, not as punishment, just closed. Like a book you finish reading and realize you don't ever need to read again. Old age wisdom. Not every door you shut has to slam. That afternoon, I sat across from Lily at my kitchen table, the same one where birthday candles were blown out, and third-grade art projects got framed crookedly. She'd brought flowers, dahlias. No card, no occasion. Just saw them, she said, placing them down before she even unzipped her jacket. "Thought of you." That's the thing about Lily. She never expects. She just offers. We drank tea. Quietly. I studied her face over the rim of my cup 29 with the calm of someone who listens more than she talks, and eyes that held stillness like a museum frame. I saw the email I said finally, from my attorney. She raised one eyebrow but didn't speak. "I'm revising the trust I added. I've made a decision." I slid a folder across the table, valuation statements, property deeds, draft documents. Neatly labeled. Inside was everything. Lily didn't even touch it. "I'm not here for that," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's why you're the only one getting it." She blinked. Once. Pressed her lips into a line. The kind of stillness that screams, "I haven't earned. You've shown up," I said, interrupting gently. "You've never treated me like a convenience. You've respected my time without asking it to serve yours. That's not something you earn. That's something you are." Quirky fact of the day, kangaroos can't walk backward. Neither can I, it seems. Later that afternoon, I sat in Renee's conference room. Polished oak table, frosted glass walls, a silence that hummed with paper and finality. We read it line by line, one clause at a time. Descendants removed due to documented neglect, emotional dereliction, and abandonment during periods of familial vulnerability, Renee read aloud. "This clause is irrevocable." She looked up. "You sure about this?" I didn't blink. "I've never been more sure." Signature, notary stamp. The trust was sealed, not hidden in a drawer, not wrapped in tissue and metaphor. It was front and center in a folder labeled Boarding Pass. Final. That night I played Ella Fitzgerald while I made dinner. Rosemary chicken lemon rice, roasted carrots with honey, candlelight, cloth napkin, 1 glass of wine. Not to celebrate, but to confirm. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. I didn't check it right away. The carrots were perfectly crisp on the edges, and Ella was singing Someone to Watch Over Me, but curiosity won. I reached across the table, flipped the screen. Brad, thinking of flipping your house one day. Want to get some renovation estimates. Curious what it'd take. I stared, then smiled. Didn't respond. Didn't text back. You must be confused. Didn't send a screenshot. Didn't use a period. Just let the message sit, like a moldy lemon left out too long. Then I opened my laptop and requested a full title report from the county assessor. I already knew what it would say, but I wanted it anyway. Black ink on official paper. Owner of record, Ruth Elaine Keating. No secondary title holders. No pending transfers. No shared deeds. Just me. Then I called the HOA, asked them to check the contact list. We have a note here from a Brad Keating, the woman on the line, said carefully. He requested access for renovation estimates, something about expanding the kitchen. I smiled tightly. He's not on the deed. A pause. Would you like us to remove his name? Yes, I said, voice like cold silver. Remove him, everywhere. By sundown, Brad's access to anything past my lawn had evaporated. The space was mine again. The next morning, I met with a new financial advisor. Someone recommended by Lily, clean slate, no history with my family, no assumptions baked into our interactions. Her office smelled like eucalyptus and leather. Calm, measured. She had that quiet confidence you only see in judges or seasoned pilots, the kind of people who can land things even in stormy weather. I want to restructure my estate distribution, I told her, sliding the trust documents across the table. Of course, she said, adjusting her glasses. Any specific priorities? Yes, I said, folding my hands. Conditions. Performance-based. Respect-based. She tilted her head slightly. Intrigued. So, you're creating a will with evaluations. Exactly. And we did. Clause by clause. No inheritance without 5 years of consistent emotional presence. No contact. No cash. A special clause for Ava, Brad's daughter, only if she shows up out of integrity, not inheritance. And for Lily, a clause that couldn't be touched. Locked. Untouchable. By the time we were finished, the trust read less like a family tree and more like a vetting system. The kind you'd use for employees you weren't sure you should promote. Old age wisdom. Sometimes blood ties are just ropes waiting to be pulled around your neck or out from under your feet. I retitled my house that same afternoon. From personal ownership to a private trust, with a name no one in the family would recognize. Just a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing unless you had the key. No flipping, no curious renovations, no budgeting their futures with my bricks and beams. That night, I stood on the porch with a shawl wrapped around my shoulders. The breeze was cool, but my thoughts were sharp. I scrolled Instagram, not out of habit, just curiosity. There it was, Heather's newest post. A throwback photo from years ago. Me holding her newborn eyes, exhausted, but smiling. The caption, she's the glue. Always has been. Couldn't do life without her. Comments poured in. Mom goals. You're so lucky. What a bond. I didn't comment. I didn't text. I didn't even screenshot it, not yet. Instead, I archived it in a folder on my computer. I'd started building digital fiction. One subfolder was titled Public Narrative, Private Absence. Next to that, another tabbed Receipts. Quirky fact of the day, elephants can recognize themselves in a mirror. It's called self-awareness. Took me 68 years, but I finally passed that test too. I printed the post, 3-hole punched it. Filed it behind a Facebook memory where she'd thanked me for everything, but forgot to mention what the everything was. It was like watching someone make a scrapbook of a relationship that only existed in her captions. So I made my own binder. One tab was for old birthday cards, the ones that said love you but came without calls. Another was labeled visible labor, babysitting logs, grocery runs, Venmo transfers. Heather once asked me to buy groceries and just send the receipt I did. She never reimbursed me. So I added that to the log, too. I didn't keep these things out of spite. I kept them because if they ever questioned why I'd rewritten the boarding order, I'd have an archive. And speaking of boarding, that week I booked another trip. Not far, just the mountains. A cabin with a wood stove, a porch swing, and no Wi-Fi. I didn't tell anyone. I packed one small suitcase, just for me. 3 books, a bottle of wine, my estate documents, a fire starter kit. Sometimes peace doesn't come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from not needing to answer the door. The cabin was everything the photos promised, small, quiet, wrapped in mist. Perched just above the tree line with a porch that faced east, so the sun greeted me before anything else did. No key cards, just a brass key. No welcome packet filled with coupons. Just a hand-drawn map left on the table with a sticky note wood piles behind the shed. Watch out for deer. I hadn't checked if the place had Wi-Fi. I didn't care. I was here for the quiet, not the digital kind, the real kind. The kind that doesn't blink with notifications or vibrate with obligations. Old age wisdom. If silence feels threatening, you're probably overdue for a conversation with yourself. On the second night, I lit a fire. Not just turned a dial, built one. The matches were damp. The kindling refused to catch. I coaxed it patiently. Just like I'd once coaxed Heather to latch as a newborn. Just like I'd coaxed Brad through geometry after school. Patience had always been a gift I handed away freely, but here I kept some for myself. I poured a glass of bourbon I'd picked up at a roadside shop. Small batch, smoky, perfect. Then I opened the folder again, the one labeled Living Trust. I reread every clause, every revision, every signature, every notarized seal. Nothing surprised me anymore, except one name that kept drifting into my thoughts, quiet as Snowfall Maya, Diane's daughter, my best friend's girl. Maya had been 10 when Diane died. I'd held her hand through the funeral, paid the hospital bill when no one else stepped up, showed up to her graduation, sent a handmade quilt when she gave birth last month. No one asked me to. I just showed up, like I always did. So I reached for a pen and added a clause to the trust to Maya F. $25,000 for the first steps of motherhood, should she ever need it. For her tenderness and her strength. No fanfare, no call, no announcement, just earned. That night, the fire popped gently. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a lullaby in a language only solitude understands. And just when I thought I'd spend the whole trip undisturbed, my phone silent for 2 days, buzzed once. Brad. I didn't answer, just stared at the screen. Then it rang again. I let it go to voicemail. "Hey, Mum," his voice said. Polite? Careful. "We've been talking and wondering if you'd be open to a sit-down. Just us. About everything. Especially inheritance. Think it'd be good for everyone if we met." He let the word inheritance hang in the air like steam over spoiled leftovers. I didn't reply. Not because I couldn't. Because there's a difference between being called and being summoned. Quirky fact. A group of flamingos is called a flamboyance. But when one breaks from the group and flies alone, it's still just called a flamingo. Doesn't lose the title. Just flies quieter. That night, I stood on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, bourbon warming my chest, and looked out over the ridge. There was no doorbell here. No one to ask if I'd booked the bigger cabin. No guilt for watching a fire burn without sharing it. And I realized they hadn't heard the door close because I'd never slammed it. I'd just quietly left. We met at a cafe. Neutral ground. Not too upscale to spook them into suspicion, not too casual to let them think I was still playing mom. I arrived early. Of course, I always do. Window seat. Soft light across the table. One mug of tea still warm. and the documents sealed, resting beside my clutch like a quiet verdict. Brad entered first laptop bag, slung over one shoulder, like he was heading into a board meeting he intended to run. Heather followed moments later, coffee in hand, sunglasses perched on her head, like she didn't notice the clouds outside. They approached with cautious smiles, the kind you use with elderly neighbors you're hoping to borrow tools from without actually returning them. "Hey, Mom," Brad said as he sat. "Appreciate you making time." Heather chimed in, trying too hard. "You look well." "I am," I said. Nothing more. The silence that followed was brittle. Sugar glass tension. One loud truth would have shattered it. Brad opened his laptop, pulled out a folder. Charts. Timelines. Flow models. Tabs labeled Foundations. Donor-advised funds. Transition planning. "We've been thinking a lot about legacy planning," he began, and wanted to talk through some options that could really benefit everyone. Smooth things out. Heather leaned in. "It would be in your honor, of course. Old age wisdom, sometimes honor, is just a prettier name for access." I glanced at the paper they slid across the table. A proposed family foundation with me as figurehead. They'd just help facilitate. "Proactive," I said softly, flipping the corner of the spreadsheet. "Exactly," Brad smiled. I reached into my tote and pulled out a single envelope. Thin, unassuming. Just one notarized letter folded inside. Heather opened it first. Her eyebrows drew together like curtains shutting. "This removes us from the trust," she whispered. Not a question. A realization. Brad leaned over, scanned the page. His jaw tensed. "You're doing this out of spite." "No," I said. Calm, clear. "I'm doing this out of record." Heather's voice tried to sound reasonable. "We didn't mean to make you feel. You didn't think about how I'd feel at all," I cut in. "You used my time, my silence. You counted on me being too polite to say anything." Brad pushed the papers back toward me. "So that's it. We're nothing to you now." I stood. Slowly. The envelope went back in my bag. "You decided that," I said. "I just documented it. Quirky fact, octopuses don't just change color, they change texture. Smooth to spiky in a blink. It's not camouflage, it's self-defense." Outside the cafe, air was colder than I remembered. Or maybe I was warmer. Either way, I didn't shiver. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Facebook notification. "Heather Vaughn has posted a status." I didn't want to look, but I did. "Cut off without warning. The elderly need more mental health support. Check in on your parents. You never know what they're battling." Weaponized concern. The kind designed to garner sympathy while redirecting the blame. I took a screenshot, printed it later, filed it behind the other receipts. One more entry in the perception versus presence folder. Then I did something they didn't expect. I made an appointment with my primary care physician. Subject, full cognitive evaluation. Not because I needed it, but because they'd need it not to question me. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and eucalyptus, like someone was trying to clean something and soothe it at the same time. I wore a navy blazer, slacks and flats that made no noise on the tile. My hair was neatly twisted at the nape of my neck. I looked composed, because I was. I looked prepared, because I'd had decades of practice. The neuropsychologist was in her 40s, with calm eyes, and the kind of voice you'd want narrating your meditation app. She welcomed me in with polite curiosity. "What brings you in today?" "I'd like a full cognitive evaluation," I said plainly. "Not a screening, a proper one." "Are you experiencing any concerns?" "No," I said, and smiled gently. "But it seems others are." Old age wisdom. If they question your mind, give them paperwork. We spent over 2 hours in that office. Pattern recognition, memory drills, logical reasoning, verbal analysis. She asked me to list as many US governors as I could. I gave her 10 before she moved on. We discussed current events. I explained by choice the difference between a revocable and irrevocable trust. She gave a small smile when we finished. "Honestly, your scores are well above average for your age." I didn't smile back. "I'll need that in writing, notarized." She nodded. She'd seen this before. 3 days later, the sealed report was delivered to my attorney's office. A second copy went into my medical chart. A third went into the locked safe behind my closet with a sticky note, fitness confirmed. No debate. Quirky fact of the day, sharks are older than trees. Which means if you survive long enough, you get misjudged by organisms that came after you. That same afternoon, I emailed Renee. Subject: one more clause, please. Body ad, a line near the top of the trust. Any individual who questions the testator's mental fitness forfeits all remaining access to funds, benefits, or assets effective immediately and without appeal. Her reply was immediate. Understood. That night, I brewed tea, sat down at the dining table with my laptop, and opened the file I'd been drafting for months, the first-class trip that changed my will. It started with a gate number. It ended with a folder name. I never meant to publish it. But the truth, once you begin writing it down, stops letting you pretend it's just a journal. The next morning, Lily stopped by with a flash drive and a shy smile. "I've been thinking," she said, kicking off her shoes at the door. "If you ever want to digitize your writing, I could help. You've got decades of voice in these journals. It deserves to outlive paper." I blinked. "You know, I said I was just about to ask you the same thing." We spent the entire afternoon side by side, scanning, typing, laughing at things I barely remembered writing. Some lines made Lily cry. Others made me wish I'd said them aloud years ago. We uploaded the piece to a small blog I hadn't touched in 5 years. It was bare bones. No banner, no comments, just the post. Exit strategy, a departure story. I didn't share it on Facebook, didn't tag anyone, just posted it. Quietly. Let it exist. 2 days later, an email arrived. Subject: memoir, submission inquiry, American Thoughtline magazine. They'd read the blog. They wanted to publish it. Maybe expand it into a feature? Possibly more. They saw me, without Heather, without Brad, without needing to wear my motherhood like a service uniform. That evening, Lily stayed for dinner. After lemon pasta and a small glass of wine, she asked, "What happens if they try to contact you again?" I looked at her for a long moment. "That depends," I said, "on whether they're calling as children or creditors." There was no press release, no announcement, no confrontation, just paperwork. It began with a notarized letter. One sentence, centered and bold mailed, certified to my attorney, my doctor, and my retirement account manager. Effective immediately, Heather Vaughan and Bradley Keating are barred from direct or representative contact with all fiduciary medical and legal agents of Ruth Elaine Keating. It wasn't revenge, it was infrastructure. The kind of structure no storm can blow over. Next came the proxy forms. At my kitchen table, the same place I once cut crusts off sandwiches and wrote checks for overdue violin lessons, I filled out a clean, single-page document: medical power of attorney. Name listed Lily Monroe. Backup: Gloria Matthews. Neighbor: friend of 30 years. The one who checked on me after Michael passed. The one who showed up with soup, not questions. I walked the documents to the mailbox myself. Not because I needed the exercise, because I wanted to feel the moment, to mark it. Old age wisdom: protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival at a higher frequency. That night I lit a candle and pulled down a box from the hallway closet, labeled personal, hold until needed. Inside, I placed the new manila folder. All of it: estate directives, medical preferences, funeral details, power of attorney forms, and the neurocognitive report. Topped it with a sticky note. Everything is here. Read, not guess. Quirky fact. In Iceland, people give books to one another on Christmas Eve and spend the night reading. It's called Jólabókaflóð, the Christmas book flood. That kind of gift feels more permanent than 1,000 Facebook posts. And speaking of Facebook, Heather posted again. I wasn't tagged, but I saw it. A cozy living room, string lights, cocoa mugs, matching pajamas for the kids, fireplace video playing on the TV behind them. Caption: family ski trip loading? Holidays together? Traditions? The good stuff. I wasn't invited, didn't see my name, didn't see a text, didn't even see a gap where I used to be. The dinner table shrunk. So did my patience. I reread the caption holidays together. Traditions. I closed the laptop slowly, like someone pushing away a dish they didn't order. Didn't sigh. Didn't weep. Didn't call Lily. I needed silence, not sympathy. I pulled down another box, this one marked Winter Mist. Tucked beneath old scarves and a cracked snow globe was a travel journal I hadn't opened since 2003. Sticky note on the front, North Carolina, just in case. Back then I'd almost gone solo. I didn't. This time I would. By morning I had a reservation at a cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Small, self-contained with a porch swing and a view of a ridge too beautiful for regret. I packed one suitcase. No just-in-case sweaters. No what if the kids stop by casserole dishes. Just the essentials. On the second night the wind was sharp. The fire wouldn't light easily, but I coaxed it again. Not rushed, not forced. When the flame caught it felt personal. I opened the folder again, flipped past the trust documents, and wrote a new entry under gifts of presents. To Ava Keating, 25,000 custodial account to mature at 25. For tenderness shown before she even knew it had value. For asking, not assuming. No dramatic reveal, no social media hashtag. Just a quiet yes for the girl who showed up without a map, hoping to hear a story not told at anyone's expense. Later, I raised my glass of bourbon toward the ridge. Not in a toast. In agreement, some things don't need to be explained to be real. The magazine hit newsstands on a Tuesday. It arrived in my mailbox, tucked beneath a coupon flyer and a charity envelope addressed to resident. The cover was soft pastels, all springtime optimism. Right under the masthead exit strategy, a departure story by Ruth E. Keating. Page 5, full spread. My words barely edited. I sat down on the porch with my reading glasses, a glass of mint tea, and let my name echo inside me for a moment. Not Mom. Not Grandma. Not the bank. Just Ruth. The piece wasn't angry. It didn't name names. It simply told the truth about being left, about choosing yourself, and about the quiet power of rewriting your documents instead of raising your voice. Old age wisdom. If they won't hear your words, put them in writing they can't ignore. By noon, my inbox had started to fill. Emails from strangers, some short. Thank you. You told my story too. Some long. I'm 73. They only call when they need babysitting or money for tuition. Your piece gave me the courage to finally say no. By Thursday, I had over 200 messages. By Saturday, that number had tripled. A lawyer in Oregon shared the article in her elder advocacy newsletter. A financial planner in Chicago sent me a personal thank you note with a photo of her own amended will. One woman from Maine mailed me a luggage tag that read, "First class forever." She added a note. They tried to seat me by the lavatory. You reminded me I could walk to the front. Quirky fact: monarch butterflies will travel over 2,500 miles to find their migration grounds, and they've never been there before. They go on instinct. I think some of us are like that too. Just late bloomers with a carry-on. Then came the voicemail. Heather, tight voice, measured, saw the article. You looked polished. I hope you're proud of yourself. Click. No apology, just residue. I didn't respond. I opened my journal instead and wrote one line. Their first class was a seat. Mine was a decision. That week, I received a padded envelope from the publisher. Inside was the final layout for the first print run of my memoir. The cover, a deep indigo, the title pressed in soft gold foil. Exit strategy, a departure story. Lily dropped by that evening with a bottle of wine and 2 new notepads. You're going to need more space, she said, grinning. She flipped through the advance copy with care, touching the edges like it was a family heirloom. Though in truth, it was the start of a family I'd chosen. We made dinner together, simple pasta and a green salad. After we ate, she asked quietly, "What if they come back again?" After all this, I didn't answer right away. I looked out at the dusk, settling on the porch, soft and unbothered. I guess I said eventually that depends on whether they're showing up, or just circling back for what they think they lost. Then I passed her a folded sticky note. She smiled when she read it. Not everything we lose is a loss. The departure board blinked. Flight 328 to Lisbon on time. I stood at Gate 8 passport, tucked inside my small leather travel case, the one with the scuffed corner and ink stains from a leaking pen I'd carried through Greece once. My coat was navy, my boots flat and weatherproof. Hair pinned neatly, sunglasses resting atop my head, not for the sun, but for the statement. The gate agent smiled as I approached. "Welcome back, Miss Keating. You're in 1A again today." I smiled, unhurried, soft. "Thank you." No double-checking the screen. No wondering if I'd been forgotten. I was on the list. Confirmed. Stamped. Boarded by name, not by favor. I walked the jet bridge slowly, let the aisle stretch open before me. The overhead bin above my seat was still empty, still waiting. I placed my carry-on inside. One smooth movement. My fingers brushed the inside wall of the compartment like I was greeting an old friend. Then I sat. Window seat. The leather was cool, familiar. On my lap sat a copy of my book Exit Strategy, a departure story, already creased near the edges, already passed through too many hands to look pristine. And that was the point. The flight attendant passed by and paused. She looked at the cover. "Is that yours?" she asked, her eyes widening. "My mom cried when she read the part about the gate." I nodded. That was the first place I realized I could be left behind, and the last time I allowed it. She smiled, something close to reverence. "Tea or champagne before takeoff?" "Tea," I said, "with lemon." Old age wisdom. Altitude doesn't change the air you breathe. It changes how you see the ground. The other passengers filtered in, juggling backpacks and headphones, irritated by delays, bumping elbows. I watched them, not with judgment, but detachment. Years ago, I would have wondered where they were going, who was waiting to greet them. Now I just hoped they weren't giving away their seats for free. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm, assured. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'll be departing shortly. Weather en route looks clear. Cruising altitude 37,000 feet. I folded the safety card back into its slot without reading it. I already knew how to survive turbulence. I'd learned it on land. Quirky fact of the day, swans mate for life, but only after fierce territorial battles. Sometimes you've got to hiss a little before settling into peace. I opened to chapter 1 and whispered the first line to myself. They told me to wait, so I wrote my own boarding pass. The final passengers rushed past. None of them looked at me. None of them knew that the woman sitting quietly in 1A had changed more than just her seat. She'd rewritten the boarding order. As the wheels lifted cleanly from the runway, I reclined slowly. No guilt. No need to explain. I didn't look back at the shrinking city. I didn't search the sky for closure. Instead, I closed my eyes, let the soft hum of flight settle in my bones, and wrote one last line in the margin of my journal. They couldn't find a seat for me, so I became the pilot. Florence greeted me with rain, not a dramatic downpour, just a thoughtful drizzle. The kind that makes you slow down, wrap your scarf a little tighter, and tuck your journal under your coat as you step out into the narrow cobblestone streets. I had no itinerary, no museum reservations, no group dinner bookings, just a room key in my pocket and enough Italian to order wine and ask for directions to the Duomo. The inn I'd chosen sat just outside the city centre. Small, quiet. A carved wooden sign above the door read, "Casa per sognare," a house for dreaming. The clerk at the front desk, no older than Ava, handed me a leather-bound parcel wrapped with twine. "For Signora Keating," she said with a small bow. It was left with a note. "Congratulations." Inside was the first finished copy of my memoir. The real one. Thick. Real paper. Gold foil. The dedication page exactly as I'd requested. To the women left at the gate. "You didn't miss the flight. You built your own wings. I carried the book to my room and sat on the window seat. Below the street bustled with umbrellas and laughter. A woman on a bicycle pedaled past, holding a baguette under her arm like it was a bouquet. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang like a promise. I opened to chapter 1 and read slowly this time, not as an editor, but as the woman who'd lived it. Every word was mine. Not dictated, not approved. Owned. Later that night, I wrote 2 postcards. One to Lily. Save the garden stories. I'll bring you wine and more questions when I'm back. And one to Ava. The olive trees remind me of you, quiet, strong-rooted. I didn't post them yet. I would. But for now, they sat on the desk beside a cup of tea, cooling in the evening light. Old age wisdom. Some letters take time. And the right time isn't always when you finish writing. Sometimes it's when you're finally ready to be heard. I didn't bring my phone on this trip. Not out of protest, out of peace. I didn't want texts from Heather, performative or probing. I didn't want meme-based apologies from Brad. I wanted to walk through a place older than all of our disappointments and just be me. Quirky fact of the day. There's a species of jellyfish called Turritopsis dohornii, the immortal jellyfish. It can revert to its earliest form and start its life cycle over. No one talks about how messy that probably is. That's how this felt. Not like rebirth, not like revenge, more like a reset, a return to self. I spent my mornings with cappuccinos and fresh figs, my afternoons in bookstores and side streets. The shopkeepers didn't know my story. They didn't call me Mom or Nana. They called me Signora, and that was enough. On my last evening, I stood on the Ponte Vecchio, watching the Arno shimmer beneath the fading sun. I held my book against my chest and took a breath that didn't have to be small. Back at the inn, I slid the finished copy of Exit Strategy onto the shelf in my room. Right between a French novella and a battered Hemingway, I smiled. Not everything needs a witness to be real. Before bed, I added one final entry to my journal. Once I bought my own seat, I never settled for the aisle again. The story I just told you doesn't end with a slamming door or a tearful reunion. It ends softly with a suitcase packed by one woman on her own terms, under a sky that doesn't demand explanation. Because sometimes the most powerful stories don't crescendo. They settle. We spend so much of our lives making room for others, clearing chairs, rewriting calendars, swallowing silence. And sometimes we mistake being included for being loved. But as Ruth taught us, being seen is not the same as being seated. And inclusion, when it's conditional, is just another form of erasure dressed up as etiquette. She wasn't trying to burn bridges. She was simply done building them alone. With every flight, she boarded every clause, she rewrote every cup of tea sipped in solitude. Ruth wasn't just escaping neglect. She was outlining the architecture of a new life. One that didn't require validation, only verification. She left no angry voicemails, no bitter posts. She left paper trails, legal ones, truthful ones, the kind that couldn't be erased with a smile or rewritten with hashtags. She didn't get louder, she got firmer. And in the end, what she reclaimed wasn't just her trust account or her title deed. It was her time, her truth, her name. So if you're listening to this tonight, wondering whether you've waited too long to choose yourself, Ruth would tell you quietly that your wings may be late, but they're still yours. You don't need permission to board. You just need the clarity to stop waiting at the wrong gate, and maybe, just maybe, your own one-way ticket to peace of mind. Now close your eyes, exhale slowly, and remember, you're not invisible. You're just beginning.